Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Dr. Joseph Kappas, and today I'm lucky to be joined by my guest, Dr. Keith Rao. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Rao.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Kappas.
Yes, and it's great to be able to talk to you again. Dr. Rao was one of my favorite teachers at Life University, where I went to school. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show now.
Thank you. It's an interesting full circle to be sitting on the other end, and I had the joy of having you, Dr. Drzwicki, Dr. Traster. I mean, most of your staff I had as students, and way smarter than I am. You guys are doing great. I'm super proud of you guys, but yeah, it's a pleasure to talk.
Well, we appreciate that. I almost half expected you to say that I was one of your favorite students, but...
Oh, you were, Joe.
That's okay. That's okay.
I very much enjoyed you, Joe. In all seriousness, I did.
Yeah, it was a great class. But the class was all about a specific type of adjusting and analysis that you specialize in, called the global mechanical assessment.
Yes, sir.
Can you, well, before we get too deep into that, I want to know a little bit about you and your story, if you're comfortable sharing.
Sure.
And how you got into the global mechanical assessment, how you got into chiropractic in general, and healthcare as well.
Wow, I wasn't thinking about going back that far, but I started under chiropractic care as a sophomore in high school. I was running cross country and track. I had had asthma and allergy problems my entire life. Asthma was real different back then. We didn't have inhalers, and wasn't taking all kinds of medication, but I had breathing issues, and met somebody who is now on the board of trustees of Life University in an engagement party at a neighbor. And he suggested, when he heard, he was a brilliant communicator, turned everything to chiropractic and health. And he said, you should see the groom to be. And I said, okay. And so I ended up seeing the guy, and I started getting adjusted, and we made some nutritional changes more. This is early 70s. So distilled water, whole grains, raw sugar, honey, stuff like that was crazy. And before I knew it, I was doing better. And my parents noticed, it definitely made a difference in my health. I was originally science-oriented, like marine biology. You're too young, Joe, but Jacques Cousteau was one of my heroes back in those days. And that was the plan. And it shifted that time to go to chiropractic school, and actually came down to Life, came to the old DE meeting, which you'll know about, back when it was huge, and saw that Life University, it was the one building, and very few students, and started school in 79, graduated in 82, practiced a couple different settings, realized I wanted to teach at some point. I enjoy practice, I enjoy patient care, but I never was a huge fan of the business end of it, as all chiropractors either enjoy or don't enjoy. And ended up on faculty at Life, had the blessing of connecting with John Downs, Dr. John Downs, who was like department head of technique back then. And he was caring for the athletes. This is 94, 95. I ended up starting to help care for the student athletes, worked under Dr. Downs for years. And it was during that time, as I was getting more immersed in extremity adjusting, which had always been an interest, but I learned a ton from him, Kevin Herron, Dr. Herron, and his seminar program. And then in that process, Dr. Downs was developing what now has become the global mechanical assessment, and do some changes at Life University he ended up becoming a dean. I took over his classes, and I've been teaching, had the joy of teaching those classes for a long time now. I'm not even sure how many years it's been in the masters. So we have a master's degree at Life University, several actually, but one in sport health science. So I teach in that area. And then I also direct the care of our student athletes, the chiropractic care of our student athletes.
Mm-hmm.
So we work with the athletic trainers and the strength coaches, et cetera. So a little bit of background there. And so it was an evolutionary process that we took muscle testing that we had been using, and I said, Dr. Downs did all the innovating. I followed along. I'll be completely honest. And as opposed to I won't be honest. I hate when I use that phrase. I'm sorry. But Dr. Downs began to do muscle testing with something different in mind. And so and he developed this terminology, and a lot of the language came over time, but it was long lever neurological challenges. So using muscle testing to assess the integrity of the function of the nervous system, and looking to see the terms that we talked about in class. Is there anticipatory postural adaptations? What does the person do? I like to use the word, and I'm not sure where I got it from, but quiet. The person should be able to lay on the table as we do these muscle tests. And really, it should be effortless, both for the doctor and the patient. When it's not, they're struggling to get terms I learned from the functional neuro folks like yourself and Dr. Drizwicki, Dr. Traster. Their afferent world is not right. Their efferent world, the signals aren't right with the brain, or what's getting to the brain's not right, or what's coming from the brain's not right. And so we look for those anticipatory postural adaptations, or as we do the test, compensatory. So one of the joys, despite the fact that symptomatically they may change, is you can see as you do the assessment and then render care, the efficiency increase, the balance increase, the fluidness, especially with athletes. Athletes, it's so much more evident because they're so tuned in to their bodies. And I have the pleasure mostly, and I also have been the chiropractor up at Kennesaw State University, just up the road from Life University for 17, 18 years, abbreviated this year. Our seasons all got cut short at Life and KSU, and hopefully things will resume in the fall here. So, but working with athletes, you really do get to see it, Doc, in a different way. You see it with patients. The more athletic, I think, the more obvious it becomes.
Yeah. For those who may not be aware, you kind of touched on it a bit as far as what you're looking for with the global mechanical assessment, but can you kind of run down the goal and what a patient might expect from this type of approach?
Okay. I was thinking about this in putting this in context, and I think there are three things, I guess. Again, I will quote Dr. Downs consistently. Hopefully, when I told him I was going to do this, he hoped he could call in and ask questions, which I hope is not going to happen because I'm sure he would try to stump me some way. He's got a great sense of humor. But one of the things that he talked about, and that I've been thinking a lot about over the last few years, and in the context of what you guys do, guests, I've been listening to your podcast since they started, and which kudos on the podcast. I've really enjoyed a lot, and it's been fun to listen to people I know and don't know talk about what they do. But one of the beauties of chiropractic, and I think the thing that stands out, whether you're taking the approach that you all take, or if you will, a more traditional approach that I take, which is a whole nother long conversation and not a good or bad. But we assume, unlike the rest of the world, that the nervous system is not this neutral conduit. And that when Dr. Downs started talking about that term a few years ago, I was just totally blown away. Everyone else in healthcare, it seems, unless it's a pathology, assumes that the nervous system is always just transmitting 100% from brain to tissue all the time. And there's never a problem when a muscle, a joint, an organ is not working properly, that the problem is from the brain to the tissue. It's the tissue, it's the joint, it's the muscle, etc. And what chiropractic has said, what if, if you will, like the big timeout, wait a second, what if there's a problem between the tissue cell, the brain cell and the tissue cell, to use the old terminology?
Mm-hmm.
So, I used to kind of scoff at the idea of like the safety pin cycle of afferent and efferent, good afferent, good efferent, and back and forth. But there's great beauty in that, I see now. And modern neurological research seems to be supporting all that in ways that we certainly didn't fathom when I was in school, which was a long time ago. And basically I was thinking, Doc, that most of what I do, I didn't learn in school. It's changed that dramatically. And I can't even imagine 30 years from now, if I was still alive and able to have a conversation with you, what you'd be telling me about you've learned over those, 30 years of practice, or 35 years. But so that primary focus or understanding that there could be interference in the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
The old chiropractic term is subluxation. Other people will use the word interference, but something that's not right. Amplitude, the amount, the quality. There's a snag someplace, to use the layman's version of snag.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And then secondly, we look neurological, joint motion, and soft tissue. Again, Dr. Downs' idea of the 1, 2, 3 paradigm. So when we manage a patient, when we're trying to work with a patient, we're thinking, let's look at that neurology first, and then look at the joints and its implications in neurology. And neurology, particularly upper cervical, and in a functional neuro, it would be maybe brain type issues, et cetera, eye movements, et cetera. And then lastly, soft tissue. Not that soft tissue is not hugely important, but we think it's a result of what's going on with the neurology and the joint motion,
Mm-hmm.
and not the starting place. So nothing wrong with foam rolling and massage and rehab and all that sort of stuff. But if there's a neurological problem to begin with, we feel it's incumbent to start with the neurology and then move to the joints outside of the C-spine into the rest of the spine, extremities, etc., which we do all the time. We're constantly adjusting the entire spine, and not at one time, but we're adjusting extremities.
Mm-hmm.
And then rehab is huge, and that's something your generation of chiropractors have come. When I was in school, there was no such thing.
Mm-hmm.
We gave somebody a cervical pillow, and that was cervical exercise. That's not an exercise. So that's gotten much more involved, and there's great work out there in that regard. And then lastly, we look globally, regionally, and locally. So when a patient comes in, we're going to start focusing on their local problem, whatever their chief complaint that they might come in with. And then though we're going to try to look big picture. So is the gait causing a problem with the shoulder? We know 50% of throwing force comes from the lower extremity. So if the lower extremity is not working right, there's no way that the arm's going to work right. Mm-hmm. So we try to look at that big picture, and then look at the region, the kinetic chain. So shoulder, elbow, wrist, hand, or foot, knee, hip, into pelvis, and then always the core is a huge consideration from a rehab standpoint, because the core is going to transmit forces from lower to upper. It's going to stabilize the spine, whether it's back pain, neck pain, any of those type of things are huge. So those concepts of the neutral conduit, we're saying it's not a neutral conduit, um, and then the neurological joint motion soft tissue, and then global, regional, local. That's foundational. With that context, then we do a series of muscle tests trying to see how the patient is functioning. After it's a given that we're going to do an examination, otherwise orthopedic exam, imaging as needed, all that kind of stuff, particularly if somebody has an acute injury. And then we're going to look at work on that and in that model that I just described. And then certainly, particularly like if it's an athlete at Life University or KSU, we're cooperating with the athletic trainer to, they're going to focus on that soft tissue concept, whether it's a instrument assisted soft tissue mobilization or kinesiotaping or a rehab exercise or changing their strength conditioning program, et cetera. And we as a chiropractor would probably have input on that. But in the way we're set up, and lots of people do it differently, we tend to focus on our distinct chiropractic niche,
Mm-hmm.
and then go from there.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered that or just got off the field a little bit there.
You did, definitely. And I think one of the things I really liked, or my favorite thing about global mechanical assessment, is kind of what you described. You're looking first at the whole body, look centrally more at the spine. How is the spine moving? How is the input from the spine? And then you get closer and closer to the problem, regionally. Do I need to manipulate or affect the shoulder before I get down to the wrist?
Right.
Everything is connected, and the approach that GMA takes to adjusting, I think, is pretty all encompassing. So that was definitely one of my favorite things. And I think most people, when you talk to them who aren't familiar or as familiar with chiropractic, they don't always think of a chiropractor adjusting extremities, right?
No.
It's always spine in their minds.
No.
So,
Absolutely.
so just having the knowledge that that there are chiropractors who do focus on these extremity issues and how impactful that can really be
Right.
to somebody's neurology is huge, I think.
Right. And it's I'm thinking of the person that comes in and I worked on their foot or their knee and they're like, I'm going to have surgery on my shoulder. I'm like, what's going on with your shoulder? You never mentioned that. Well, you don't work on shoulders. You just work on feet or knees. They think we're, limited. And if you don't dig in, sometimes you wouldn't know what's going on. I mean, and then, if they give you a chance, sometimes you can help. And sometimes, of course, there's need for surgery.
Right.
One of my old colleagues is an athletic trainer, and you may remember me saying this, if it ain't ripped, torn, or broken, you're our guys, talking about the chiropractors. So if it's ripped or torn, as in a torn muscle or a torn tendon or broken, if it's broken bone, we'll work with the patient, with the orthopedist or whatever, but we can't fix a broken bone, etc. So, but you're right. Going back to what you were saying about extremities, I can't anymore. And I've said this, it feels like 1,000 times in class. I can't imagine somebody with low back pain coming into my office and I didn't look at their feet and their knees and their hips,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to, if you will, a more traditional chiropractic approach of certainly adjusting their spine, etc. The example I was thinking, Joe, when you were Dr. Kappas, excuse me, when you were speaking, was the sprained ankle,
Mm-hmm.
and I cannot even begin to tell you how many times now since Dr. Downs came up with this idea of the global mechanical assessment, that instead of starting by adjusting the foot, maybe adjusting the spine and then adjusting the foot, we're looking at the ankle range of motion and finding it significantly impaired.
Mm-hmm.
We go up and adjust the neck. We make a chiropractic adjustment in the neck. The ankle balances. Then we may do a few other adjustments in the foot, but that major adjustment that we would have done previously
Mm-hmm.
or we may do just a little impulse into a joint as opposed to like that was the focus of what we did.
Mm-hmm.
um, Tremendously different,
Yeah.
and with incredible results. Anecdotally, I've been, kind of along the lines of what you and I were talking about earlier. We don't see much chronic ankle instability at Life University, and it's, I think, in part because of all the work we do. When somebody sprains their ankle, they're probably going to get adjusted
Mm-hmm.
along with their traditional rehab, and we're not. But we marriage those two together. So
Mm-hmm.
they're going to get the best of athletic training care and the chiropractic care, which is going to include not just the spine but the extremity, and putting that spine and extremity together
Mm-hmm.
instead of looking at them as disparate parts.
Yeah. And I think one reason I really like the global mechanical assessment is how well it complements the care that I like to deliver with the functional neurology treatment. Um, you know, the GMA is great at finding, the joints that are providing the brain with maybe inappropriate afferent information.
Right. Right.
But then in addition to that, I found it really interesting to then look centrally at, we talked pretty extensively about the vestibular system and other components of the brain that, could contribute to alterations in gait or tone in muscles, or even just knowing where your body is in space, which could leave you prone to injury. So I think pairing the two, kind of the neurology-based treatment with the global mechanical assessment is really a powerful combination for patient care.
Right. Um, if I was younger and felt like I had more time, I would love to do more of the training that you've done with Dr. Carrick and all that group. Many of the folks I know, and I'm conversational with concepts, but
Mm-hmm.
I've never gotten into the depth that you have. Um, Kind of, it's almost like if I was going to leave the academic world and go into full-time practice, I'd want athletic trainers to do rehab and taping and modalities and all those type of things in practice. And I'd love to be working with the functional neurology folks, or whatever term you want to use to describe that nowadays, um, to to do the stuff that I don't look at. And I've been fortunate enough to have people working at Life University with me, recent graduates. We had an athlete recently that was having. I don't want to give any of the details in particular because it would be maybe a little identifying, but loved the care I was giving, making significant, felt great. But it was a functional neuro approach that got them past. And then some specific, of all things, I say of all things, not like I wouldn't believe it, but they got specific upper cervical care as well. So, I think what's an interesting trend in our profession, and it's not well defined yet, is this: we're specializing,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't necessarily. It's not like in the medical world where you go to the gastroenterologist and the orthopedic surgeon, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody understands that by the title. But we're all just chiropractors, and it's sometimes hard to know. But yeah, I do that routinely. Send somebody for upper cervical care or functional neurology care. Um, still have a dream of having a big office with all those people in one place,
Yeah.
much like you guys are doing, which is why I'm so excited about what you all have been accomplishing.
Yeah, I love what they've been able to do and what we've been able to do with this clinic, and how
Right.
we've been able to kind of bring in a lot of different talents to really give great care. Um, Going back to your class, by the way, I think one of the most eye-opening things for me as a runner, uh, and this is especially timely because I just bought new running shoes over the weekend,
Ah,
um, is that looking at global mechanical assessment, assessing a patient before and after gait, and even before and after trying on different pairs of shoes, and seeing how, I guess, well the body is able to adapt to those types of shoes in your gait pattern. And then by just changing the shoes or adjusting in various segments, how that's able to help. I thought that was very eye-opening for me.
It's a I hadn't frankly I'm when you're saying shoes, I don't usually think of in a fitting setting.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea when we talk about orthotics, we're always talking about, do we make, and this is Dr. Heron's term, do we make an orthotic to a pathomechanical foot? So, and by that, huge term there, I guess, but an abnormally moving, mechanically ungood. There's a real good English. But in all seriousness, it's yeah. Sometimes I think this goes back to that neutral conduit concept, but also, if somebody is just working with a foot by putting wedges or lifts or training different, well, did you ever think to get it adjusted? And so routinely see that, where people just have a tremendous improvement. Their knee feels better, their hip feels better, their feet don't hurt anymore because we got their foot moving. And there's a lot that can go wrong there. Not even talking about the really nasty type injuries and stuff, but just you stepped wrong when you were running, and you didn't think of it at the moment, and then a week later your knee's hurting, and you're like, well, why is my knee hurting? I didn't do anything to my knee.
Mm-hmm.
But unless somebody knows what they're doing to assess the foot and the whole, was it a neurological problem? Was it a joint? Was it a soft tissue issue? Could be any of those. But what we see consistently is that it was a global issue, that little tweak of the ankle, we always, if I do this and I drop, I'm going to end up often with a cervical problem. Same as we were talking about with the sprained ankles. So, yeah, we've had some real fun, taking the orthotic in and out, trying different shoes when somebody really has a problem, having them walk and then come back and lay on the table and see, do these long lever neurological challenges, do the muscle testings get weak or strong? Yeah, so that can be a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And most people aren't going to look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Rao, we are just about out of time. I feel like there's a lot of other topics that I want to dive into, and even dive deeper into topics we've touched on so far today. But is there any parting words that you might have, or any final thoughts that you might have for our listeners based on this topic?
I think, if you have an issue, if you're a patient with an issue, especially any kind of extremity problem, and you're looking for answers, try to get to a chiropractor. Look for a chiropractor that does extremity adjusting. I've been teaching with the Council on Chiropractic Extremity Practitioners. The Council on Extremity Adjusting, CCEP is the certification, and you go on Council on Extremity Adjusting, it's all spelled out.com, and they have a directory that you can look for people. But from a patient standpoint, yeah, if you have an issue and somebody hasn't looked at your extremities, you might find great result with that. And for the practitioners that might be listening, yeah, there's just so much we can do. Extremity adjusting in general and the global mechanical assessment are just great tools. An overview that's taught in that same Council on Extremity Adjusting. So if anybody wants information, they can look there for that module. They can reach out to me, and we can try to put them in the right direction. So I don't know if that was a good answer.
No, that was great. So if a patient wanted to find a practitioner who was competent in extremity adjusting, or maybe even the global mechanical assessment? Is there a site or a...
Global's a little bit more difficult to know, unfortunately, but the extremity, yeah, the Council on Extremity Adjusting would be my favorite. I go there, if I knew somebody in Chicago, I'd know where I'd send somebody in Chicago. But if I didn't know somebody in a town, that's where I'm going to go to try to find somebody, because I know they've had at least that basic training.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on today. I really enjoyed this conversation that we had.
Thank you, Joe. Dr. Koppas.
Welcome. I'll let you get back to your golf game here.
Oh yeah, that's the tee box is calling behind me there. So
yeah, I'm sure
I
it's
wish that was the case.
Beautiful day wherever that picture was taken.
Yeah,
but,
sunny Northern California.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, we all are longing to be there right now.
Exactly.
But thank you again, Dr. Rao.
All
It's
right.
been
Thank
a pleasure.
You, sir.
And then this has been your host from the Neuro Wellness Podcast. Be well.